I've got Casper, my 1979 Mercedes 300 SD up on the lift, doing a bunch of work to it because I want to make this thing into a daily driver, not a garage queen. Something I can drive reliably, go on a long trip even. I want to show you some of the things I'm doing. The primary reason I have Casper up on the lift today is to change the two motor mounts. You know, you look down inside there and these motor mounts kind of look okay. You can tell they're not totally collapsed. Sometimes you'll see this just totally collapsed, or you'll hear metal banging where it's so collapsed that the mount arm is actually banging on the subframe. But in this case, how did I know these motor mounts were bad? I knew it from experience, from the vibration at idle. I just knew the motor mounts were bad. I want to show you this because this might be educational to you diesel owners. Remember, this car only has a little over 160,000 miles on it. Who knows when these motor mounts were last changed, but just consider how old they are. That's a major factor on rubber parts, and particularly on cars that are garage queens. Even if they don't get driven a lot, these mounts can deteriorate. But I'm going to show you what destroyed these mounts. This is really important. Okay, watch this. We're going to take off the left side, which is located under or just rearward of the fuel injection pump. And look at the deterioration there. You see where that's coming apart right there? Look at that. What do you think caused that? That's right, diesel fuel. Diesel fuel leaking onto the motor mount, either from a leaking hand primer pump or somebody changing the pre-filter. This is right below the pre-filter. You pull that pre-filter off and let it drip on the motor mount. This is what's going to happen. Even if there's a cover on it, the diesel fuel will roll off the cover and get into the sides of the mount and deteriorate the motor mount. So if you wonder why your motor mounts don't last as long as you would like them, you have to be very careful. Anytime you're doing fuel-related service, changing the return hoses, changing the filters, pulling off the fuel line, you have to cover this motor mount area. Cover it with some sort of plastic so that any drips of diesel fuel will not end up on your motor mount. Now let's take a look at the passenger side. That doesn't look too bad, but look at that. And guess what destroyed this? This is oil leaking out of the turbocharger inlet line, which had a bad gasket. So on the passenger side, in and around the turbocharger, you need to be very careful that you don't have any oil leaks in that area that could get on this mount. Once again, even though they had a cover on it, you know, you can see the crack from the vibration. That's probably due to the fact the motor mount's collapsed. But look at the amount of oil that's gotten in there, and you can see how this one is hardened and softened this mount and destroyed this mount as well. So this is kind of a warning, kind of an alert to you diesel owners. Doesn't matter whether it's turbo or non-turbo. Don't let oil leak on your motor mounts. Don't let diesel fuel leak on your motor mounts, because it definitely will shorten the life. Now I'm putting the new ones on here and you can see how much taller they are. And you better believe that once I get these new motor mounts on, this engine is going to run a lot smoother. Here's a tip I want to share with you. It's very important on those hex-headed bolts that hold the motor mounts to subframe that you thoroughly clean inside those hex heads. Get all the junk out of there. So when you put the wrench to them and you go torque them down, you're not going to round those bolts out, because if you round these bolts out, you got real trouble. In order to change the motor mounts, you have to raise the engine. And here Jerson has used the transmission lift in a series of blocks to jack the engine up by the pulley set and the front counterbalance. He's actually built a custom cradle to hold the engine up while he's working on these motor mounts. You really don't want to be jacking on the engine pan. If you do, you want to use a big, wide, heavy, thick piece of plywood. And since we're jacking up the front of the engine, we got to be a little careful with this car on the lift. So we've got the big, tall jack here, and we've put it under the rear bumper so the car cannot tip backwards. I want to show you a few more parts I ended up changing on Casper when it was on the lift. This is another part right here that you have to be very careful of just by looking down in there and saying, oh, my V-belts look just fine. Sometimes you have to roll them over. When you roll this over, you can see all the cracks. And you really don't want to take a risk with these V-belts. If you lose these belts on the road and the engine overheats, you can destroy a diesel engine. But take a look at this one. This one looked fine from up top. But look at the chunks out of it. And these type of chunks will actually make weird noises. You'll get clicking noises and squealing noises from V-belts that look like this. When you inspect your V-belts, don't just look down on the top of them. Actually roll them to the side, check for cracking in this area, and definitely check for missing pieces like you see here. So the V-belts got changed. This is another real common part you want to change. Now these don't look that bad. You'll see a little bit of cracking right in here and you might say, oh, that's fine. But these are rock hard from age. I'm sure these are original 1979 flex discs. And when you get this hard, you'll actually get vibrations in your drive shaft. So change these flex discs when they get old. Just don't even take the chance. I've seen transmissions destroyed from the flex disc tearing apart and the driveline wrapping around the shift linkage and ruining the inside of the transmission. So that's something you don't want to take a risk at. And then this one here, my favorite one of all time, mainly because the only time I ever got stranded on the freeway was because in a gasoline-powered Mercedes, this voltage regulator brushes wore down to where they were not making contact. And look at this. Pulling this out, and you better believe I wasn't going to have this alternator charging too much longer, so that part got replaced. And, and of course, the shift bushings, I knew these needed replacing because the shifter was rattling when you drive down the road. So you can see, once again, you've seen all my videos. We have a special tool and new shift bushings that help you do this and make the job bearable, all right? And then finally, you know what these are? Those are the rear sway bar links. And on this particular one, you know, this one totally fell apart. So this was rattling back there in the rear end. So there's a few more things we're going to do to Casper, but when I'm done here, we're going to have a really nice daily driver with this turbo diesel Mercedes.